Welcome to the Johns Hopkins Women's Health Podcast, A Woman's Journey, Insights That Matter. I'm Kelly Gear-Ripken, and I invite you to listen to Johns Hopkins specialists discuss the latest topics in women's health. Now here's your host, Lily Shockney.
Hi, this is Lily Shockney from A Woman's Journey at Johns Hopkins, and this is our podcast, Insights That Matter. Until just a few years ago, scientists didn't appreciate the role of trillions of bacteria and cells that live on and inside the human body. So what have we learned about this habitat known as microbiome? My guest today is Dr. Cynthia Sears, a molecular biologist at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Sears, can you describe the microbiome and its role in our health?
Thank you, Lily. It's a pleasure to be here. Since about the early 2000s, we have increasingly appreciated that every surface of our bodies and all the connections to our mouth, our vagina, our gut are loaded with, as you said, trillions of organisms, predominantly bacteria, but we're increasingly appreciating the role of other organisms, including viruses and fungi.
What is a microbiome?
So microbiome actually refers to all the genes that are being carried by all these microbes that we carry with us. And in fact, our microbial composition exceeds the number of cells that are human that make up us. People also use the word microbiota, and sometimes people get confused about these. Microbiota refers to the actual microbes and their names, but in truth they're used interchangeably simply to describe this community that we carry with us, in which we've increasingly appreciated contribute to our health as well as contribute to disease, we believe.
So how do these contribute to our health? For example, our digestion.
We've learned that, for example, in the 1930s, germ-free mice were created. And one of the observations was that germ-free mice eat a lot. They eat and eat and eat, but they don't gain as much weight as expected. Once you colonize them or give them a microbiome, they actually eat less but gain weight, even within a couple of weeks. And so subsequent research trying to understand that phenomena have led us to understand that the bacteria in our gut actually carry enzymes that help us digest our food. So our cells do not have all the machinery needed for us to get the nutrients we need from food. So we work collaboratively with microbes to make us healthy.
So talk a little more about gut enzymes and blood vessels, even our immune system.
Right. So as this work has expanded, there's some beautiful studies showing that once your gut has all these microbes, usually bacteria, that in fact we see our cells lining our gut start making new enzymes that are important to our health or our digestion. We also can see that the blood vessels develop better in the gut. And of course, these tiny little blood vessels run all along the gut surface to help absorb nutrients. That work has been extended even further to show that not only the immune system that's in the lining of the gut, but also our systemic immune system that circulates in our body is directed by some of these microbes. And in fact, even connections have been made between single groups of organisms and specific cell types that are in our blood and help us fight off disease or fight off infections.
Now, you mentioned disease. Does the microbiome contribute to any diseases?
In 2007, the NIH launched a project known as the Human Microbiome Project. And in that project, 250 healthy individuals were extensively studied for their microbiomes. That framework went on for a number of years to give us the baseline so we understand what healthy is. And one of the key findings of that work was that each of us differs. So your microbiome and my microbiome are unique to us. So, but over time, each of us, even though our microbiome might vary by the diet we eat or other conditions we may encounter, we tend to stay more stable within ourselves. So all this background information has now allowed us to launch into studying diseases. And you can probably name a disease, and I can probably say, yep, that's being studied. But some of the big areas that have caught a lot of attention are our capacity, are gaining weight and obesity. I mean, I just described how the bacteria are sort of getting those nutrients out. So there's a lot of work in that area. There's some elegant work in heart disease.
Which affects so many people.
Right, and the bloom in the last year or two has been both in mental health and in neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, which is really a new frontier for this area.
Incredible.
And of course, you know, the diseases in the local area, such as in the gut, things like inflammatory bowel disease and colon cancer have long been a focus of this type of work.
So can we use the microbiome to help in disease treatment?
Well, that is certainly a goal. I think we have one excellent example where that has already occurred, and that is in what's known as Clostridium difficile diarrhea. So, as you may know, if you take antibiotics and you're in the hospital, you have an increased risk of obtaining this, of becoming colonized with this bacterium, and it can then induce diarrhea. And
oftentimes nicknamed as C. diff.
C. diff, that's
patients
right.
may know it as by that name.
And it's one of our leading, unfortunately, causes of infection in the hospital, and emphasizes why the appropriate use of antibiotics is so important. Nonetheless, we've found over time that it's hard to treat. It has a tendency to come back. In fact, in somewhere between 20 and 30% of individuals, even if they respond to the therapy and they seem to be doing fine, it may be back within a few weeks to a month.
And when we talk about diarrhea with this is serious diarrhea.
Right.
It just isn't the 24-hour flu bug.
Exactly. It can most definitely be life-threatening. So what we've learned is if we do something called a fecal microbiota transplant, in other words, we take prepared stool from an individual who's healthy and who's been well screened for any transmissible infectious agents, and we give that to a patient who has this recurrent Clostridium difficile disease, we have a high probability of curing the infection. Now, there's a real yuck factor to giving stool from one patient to another patient, but it is illustrative of the fact that that community of microbes in the gut, and or possibly the metabolites that they make, can actually reverse the course of C. diff diarrhea. So it's a model to try to understand how the microbiome may treat disease. So this type of work is actually going on in other areas now, trying to understand the communities that perhaps we can pluck out and create a much better quality controlled product to help treat disease. At least that's one goal in the field.
Does the donor need to be a family member?
No. It has been done with family members, but we also now have stool banks that are available.
Who would have thought it?
Right, exactly. And so much of the time now, the stool will come from a stool bank because the ability of the individual doctor to do all the testing that might be important to prevent disease transmission is more limited than a facility that has very standardized procedures.
Sense. That makes a lot of sense. Do probiotics help treat disease?
So probiotics are one of the world's biggest industries. It is also one of the areas where rigorous science, has not been applied, in my opinion, as often as it should be. In my own view, and I should back up and say there's evidence over time, not always from well-controlled studies, that patients may benefit from probiotics. But probiotics vary vastly. In fact, if you go into a store that sells probiotics and look at the bottles,
there's a whole wall of them.
There's a whole wall of them. They have different content. And it's been shown if you take them out and then try to culture what they say is in the bottle, it doesn't always come out as the label says. So there's some real issues with quality control. This fall, probiotics, in a word, took a hit. And that is because we have long thought that what are called lactobacillus-based probiotics have been safe, and I think that's still true, but they seem to be helpful in what we call non-specific diarrhea, and particularly childhood diarrhea. But the New England Journal this fall had 2 very well done multi-center studies, controlled studies, that demonstrated no benefit to the children with diarrhea who took a lactobacillus-based probiotic.
That's important to know.
I think it's important because it emphasizes why science and doing rigorous controlled trials is very important to assess therapies, including probiotics.
Now, I understand there's also a few promising studies and usage. Tell us a little bit about BioK.
So there are a couple probiotics that have been or are being studied in more depth. And one is BioK, which is a little bit more of a complex probiotic.
Okay.
And the other is VSL3, which are in additional trials and have shown benefit in early studies in inflammatory bowel disease and in Clostridium difficile disease. Another hint from the literature is that more complex probiotics, which means they have more than one type of bacterium, may be more beneficial than ones that have a single bacterium. So those are clues that are being followed up on at this time.
Is there such a thing called designer probiotics?
So that's the future. Right now we have 3 types of products. One is called prebiotics. And prebiotics are substances like inulin, which bacteria can use to create metabolites that help what we think are good bacteria expand in the gut. A second is probiotics, and that's made of bacteria that, as I just said, can be incredibly complex. And can be different types of bacteria. And the last is symbiotics, which combine a prebiotic with a probiotic. If I was going to put my nickel down, I would say symbiotics may be what we move towards in the future. But right now, most of the data we have is just on probiotics. So I'm looking forward to seeing the research that develops on both prebiotics as well as symbiotics. And then designer probiotics is a new term. As we study the microbiome and we understand which communities or which specific bacteria may be either helpful or harmful to a disease process, this is where the ideas come in that these bacteria, sometimes which have new names for us and ones we don't really discuss now in clinical medicine, may be developed into probiotics that are new therapies to be tested in patients to see if we can help disease processes.
So when our listeners are hearing all of this, I'm sure they're going to be thinking about all the commercials that we see on television of a gazillion different advertisements for probiotics. But I'm curious to know, is there a role for yogurt?
So yogurt is very interesting. So all yogurt, I just learned this recently because, we go to the grocery store and there's
wall of yogurt.
There's a whole wall of yogurt. But all yogurt actually starts with a culture of just 2 organisms.
Huh.
And both of those organisms actually make an enzyme called lactase, which is an enzyme that actually helps us to digest milk and milk products. Because I was always puzzled by the fact that individuals who may be intolerant or unable to absorb milk and may have what we call lactase deficiency sometimes seem to be able to eat yogurt just fine. And I think the explanation may be that if your deficiency in this enzyme lactase is not too severe, the bugs actually provide the enzyme to you that enable you to be able to tolerate some milk products. So is there firm evidence that yogurt reverses disease in the way we're talking about for probiotics? And the answer is no. But studies of yogurt are an area of active investigation by a number of groups, and I think we'll be seeing new information soon.
How about fermented foods, which don't sound very appetizing, but might also have a role here?
Right. In our new world with lots of different foods, fermented foods are quite popular. Again, I don't think we have evidence that this is critical to health. We certainly have a belief system, however, out there that they are. So again, I think we have to let the data develop.
So how often and what should we incorporate into our diets then?
Oh, what a great question. I would say, it's always about balance, right, in everything we do. So Mediterranean diets, the DASH diet, which you can find on the government websites, are very reasonable approaches to diet. It's all about in moderation of what we do. And include with that some exercise and getting enough rest.
Great. So thanks to Dr. Sears for sharing her expertise today, and I hope you've learned just how important it is to pay attention to your body and the importance of your microbiome. I'm Lily Shockney. Please join us on the first Thursday of each month when we'll be discussing Insights That Matter, a monthly podcast from A Woman's Journey at Johns Hopkins.
Thank you for listening to A Woman's Journey podcast. Join me, Kelly Gear-Ripken, your host, Lily Shockney, and a variety of Johns Hopkins experts on the first Thursday of each month to learn about medical advances in women's health. A Woman's Journey is grateful for the unrestricted educational grants from Biosense Webster and Boston Scientific that support our podcast series, Insights That Matter. For more information about A Woman's Journey, visit our website, hopkinsmedicine.org/A Woman's Journey, and like us on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, stay well.